narrator is Tyrion. The North went on forever. Tyrion Lannister knew the maps as well as anyone, but a fortnight on the wild track had passed for the King's Road up here and brought home the lesson that the map was one thing and the land was quite another. They had left Winterfell on the same day as the King. Amidst all the commotion of the royal departure, riding out to the sound of men shouting and horses snorting, to the rattle of wagons and groaning of the Queen's huge wheelhouse, as a light snow flurried about them. The King's Road was just beyond the sprawl of castle and town. There the banners and the wagons and the columns of knights and free riders turned south, taking the tumult with them, while Tyrion turned north with Benjen Stark and his nephew. It had grown colder after that, and far more quiet. West of the road were flint hills, grey and rugged, with tall watchtowers on their stormy summits. To the east, the land was lower, the ground flattening to a rolling plain that stretched away as far as the eye could see. Stone bridges spanned swift, narrow rivers, while small farms spread in rings around holdfasts, walled in wood and stone. The road was well trafficked, and at night, for their comfort, there were rude inns to be found. 3 days' ride from Winterfell, however, the farmland gave way to dense wood, and the King's Wood grew lonely. The flint hills rose further, higher, wilder, with every passing mile, until by the 5th day they had turned into mountains, cold, blue-grey giants, with jagged promontories and snow on their shoulders. When the wind blew from the north, long plumes of ice crystals blew from the peaks like banners. With the mountains a wall to the west, the road north veered northeast through the wood, a forest of oak and evergreen and blackbriar that seemed older and darker than any Tyrion had ever seen. The Wolf's Wood, Benjen Stark called it, and indeed their nights came alive with the howls of distant packs, and some not so distant. Jon Snow's albino direwolf pricked up his ears at the nightly howling, but never raised his own voice in reply. There was something very unsettling about that animal, Tyrion thought. There were 8 in the party by then, not counting the wolf. Tyrion travelled with his 2 men, as befit a Lannister. Benjen Stark had his own bastard nephew and some fresh mounts for the night's watch. But at the edge of the Wolf's Wood they stayed a night behind the wooden walls of the forest holdfast, and there were joined up with another of the Black brothers, one Yoren. Yoren was stooped and sinister, his features hidden behind a beard as black as his clothing, but he seemed as tough as an old root and hard as stone. With him were a pair of ragged peasant boys from the Fingers. Rapers, Yoren said with a cold look at his charges. Tyrion understood. Life on the wall was said to be hard, but no doubt preferable to castration. 5 men, 3 boys, a direwolf, 20 horses, a cage of ravens given over to Benjen Stark by Maester Luwin. No doubt they made a curious fellowship for the King's Road, or any road. Tyrion noticed Jon Snow watching Yoren with his sullen companions, with an odd cast to his face that looked uncomfortably like dismay. Yoren had a twisted shoulder and a sour smell. His hair and beard were matted and greasy and full of lice. His clothing old, patched, and seldom washed. His 2 young recruits smelled even worse, seemed as stupid as they were cruel. No doubt the boy had made the mistake of thinking that the night's watch was made up of men like his uncle. If so, Yorn and his companions were a rude awakening. Tyrion felt sorry for the boy. He had chosen a hard life, or perhaps he should say that the hard life had been chosen for him. He had rather less sympathy for the uncle. Benjamin Stark seemed to share his brother's distaste for Lannisters, and he had not been pleased when Tyrion had told him of his intentions. "I warn you, Lannister, you'll find no inns at the Wall," he said, looking down on him. "No doubt they'll find some place to put me," Tyrion had replied. "As you might have noticed, I'm small." One did not say no to the Queen's brother, of course, so that had settled the matter. But Stark had not been happy. "You will not like the ride, I promise you that," he said curtly. And since that moment that they set out, he had done all he could to live up to that promise. By the end of the first week, Tyrion's thighs were raw from riding, and his legs were cramping badly, and he was chilled to the bone. He did not complain. He was damned if he'd give Benjen Stark that satisfaction. He took small revenge in the matter of his riding fur, a tattered bearskin, old and musky smelling. Stark had offered it to him uh, in an excess of Night's Watch gallantry, no doubt expecting him to graciously decline. Tyrion had accepted with a smile. He had brought his warmest clothing with him whenever they rode out of Winterfell, and soon discovered that it was nowhere near warm enough. It was cold up here, and growing colder. The nights were well below freezing now, and when the wind blew, it was a knife cutting right through the warmest woolens. By now, Stark was no doubt regretting his chivalrous impulse. Perhaps he had learned a lesson. The Lannisters never declined, graciously or otherwise. The Lannisters took what was offered. Farms and holdfasts grew scarcer and smaller as they pressed northward, ever deeper into the darkness of the Wolf's Wood, until finally there were no more roofs or shelters under, and they were thrown back on their own resources. Tyrion had never had much use in making a camp or breaking one. Too small, too hobbled, too in the way. So while Stark and Yoren and the other men erected rude shelters, tented the horses, and built a fire, it became his custom to take his fur and wineskin and go off by himself to read. On the 18th night of their journey, the wine was a rare, sweet amber from the Summer Isles that he had brought all the way north from Castle Rock, and the book a rumination on the history of properties of dragons. With Lord Eddard Stark's permission, Tyrion had borrowed it and a few rare volumes from the Winterfell library and packed them from the ride north. He found a comfortable spot just beyond the noise of the camp, beside a swift running stream, with waters clear and cold as ice. A grotesquely ancient oak provided shelter from the biting wind. Tyrion curled up in his fur, his back to the trunk, took a sip of the wine, and began to read about the properties of dragonbone. Dragonbone is black because of its high iron content, the book told him. It is strong as steel, yet lighter and far more flexible, and of course utterly impervious to fire. Dragonbone bows are greatly prized by the Dothraki, and small wonder, an archer so armed can outrange any wooden bow. Tyrion had had a morbid fascination with dragons. When he had first come to King's Landing for his sister's wedding to Robert Baratheon, he had made a point to seek out the dragon skulls that hung on the walls of the Targaryen's throne room. King Robert had placed them with banners and tapestries, but Tyrion had persisted, or had replaced them, but Tyrion had persisted until he found the skulls in the dank cellar where they had been stored. He had expected to find them impressive, perhaps even frightening. He had not thought to find them beautiful, yet they were, as black as onyx, polished smooth, so the bones seemed to shimmer in the light of the torch. They liked the fire, he sensed. He thrust the torch into the mouth of one of the larger skulls and made the shadows leap and dance on the wall behind him. The teeth were long, curving knives of black diamond. The flame of the torch was nothing to them. They had bathed in the heat of far greater fires. When he had moved away, Tyrion could have sworn that the beast's empty eye sockets had watched him go. There were 19 skulls, the oldest more than 3,000 years old, the youngest a mere century and a half. The most recent were also the smallest, a matched pair, no bigger than a mastiff skull, and oddly misshapen. All that remained of the last two hatchlings born of Dragonstone were the last of the Targaryen dragons, perhaps the last dragons anywhere, and they had not lived very long. From there, the skulls ranged upwards in size to the great three monsters of song and story, the dragons that Aegon Targaryen and his sisters had unleashed on the seven kingdoms of old. The singers had given them names of gods: Balerion, Meraxes, Vhagar. Tyrion had stood between their gaping jaws, wordless and awed. He could have ridden a horse down Vhagar's gullet, although he would not have ridden out. Meraxes was bigger, and the greatest of them, Balerion, the Black Dread, could have swallowed an aurochs whole, or even one of the big hairy mammoths said to roam the west coast beyond the port of Ibn. Tyrion stood in that dank cellar for a long time, staring at Balerion's huge, empty-eyed skull until his torch burned low, trying to grasp the size of the living animal, to imagine how it must have looked when it spread its great black wings and swept across the skies, breathing fire. His own remote ancestor, King Lorien of the Rock, had tried to stand against the fire when he joined with King Mern of the Reach to oppose the Targaryen conquest. It was close on 300 years ago, when the seven kingdoms were kingdoms, and not mere provinces of a greater realm. Between them, the two kings had 600 banners flying, 6,000 mounted knights, and 10 times as many free riders and men-at-arms. Aegon Dragonlord had perhaps a fifth that number, the chronicles said, and most of those were conscripts from the ranks of the last king he had slain, their loyalties uncertain. The hosts had met on the broad plains of the Reach, amidst golden fields of wheat ripe for harvest. When the two kings charged, the Targaryen army shivered and shattered and began to run. For a few moments, the chroniclers wrote, the conquest was at an end, but only for those few moments before Aegon Targaryen and his sisters joined the battle. It was the only time that Vhagar, Meraxes, and Balerion were all unleashed at once. The singers called it the Field of Fire. Nearly 4,000 men had burned that day, among them King Mern of the Reach. King Loren had escaped and lived long enough to surrender, pledge his fealty to the Targaryens, and beget a son, for which Tyrion was dutifully grateful. "Why do you read so much?" Tyrion looked up at the sound of the voice. Jon Snow was standing a few feet away, regarding him curiously. He closed the book on a finger and said, "Look at me and tell me what you see." The boy looked at him suspiciously. "Is this some kind of trick? I see you, Tyrion Lannister." Tyrion sighed. "You're remarkably polite for a bastard, Snow. What do you see as a dwarf? What are you, 12?" "14," the boy said. "14, and you're taller than I will ever be. My legs are short and twisted, and I walk with difficulty. I require a special saddle to keep from falling off my horse, a saddle of my own design, you may be interested to know. It was either that or ride a pony. My arms are strong enough, but again, too short. I will never make a swordsman. Had I been born a peasant, they might have left me out to die, or sold me to some slaver's grotesquerie. Alas, I was born a Lannister of Castle Rock, and the grotesqueries are all the poorer. Things are expected of me. My father was Hand of the King for 20 years. My brother later killed that very same king, as it turns out. But life is full of these little ironies. My sister married the new king, and my repulsive nephew will be king after him. I must do my part for the honour of my house, Wouldn't you agree? Yet how? Well, my legs may be too small for my body, but my head is too large, although I prefer to think it's just large enough for my mind. I have a realistic grasp of my own strengths and weaknesses. My mind is my weapon. My brother has his sword, King Robert has his war hammer, and I have my mind. And a mind needs books as a sword needs a whetstone if it is to keep its edge. Tyrion tapped the leather cover of his book. That's why I read so much, Jon Snow. The boy absorbed all that in silence. He had the stark face, if not the name, long, solemn, guarded, a face that gave nothing away. Whoever his mother had been, she had left little of herself in her son. What are you reading about? He asked. Dragons, Tyrion told him. What good is that? There are no more dragons, the boy said, with an easy the easy certainty of youth. So they say, Tyrion replied. Sad, isn't it? When I was your age, I used to dream of having a dragon of my own. You did? The boy said suspiciously. Perhaps he thought Tyrion was making fun of him. Oh, yes. Even a stunted, twisted, ugly little boy can look down over the world when he's seated on a dragon's back. Tyrion pushed the bearskin aside and climbed to his feet. I used to start fires in the bowels of Castle Rock and stare at the flames for hours, pretending they were dragon fire. Sometimes I'd imagine my father burning. At other times, my sister. Jon Snow was staring at him, a look equal parts horror and fascination. Tyrion guffawed. Don't look at me that way, bastard. I know your secret. You've dreamt the same kind of dreams. No, Jon Snow said, horrified. I wouldn't. No? Never? Tyrion raised an eyebrow. Well, no doubt the Starks have been terribly good to you. I'm certain Lady Stark treats you as if you were one of her own. And your brother Robb, he's always been kind, and why not? He gets Winterfell, and you get the Wall. And your father? He must have had good reasons for packing you off for the Night's Watch. Stop it, Jon Snow said, his face dark with anger. The Night's Watch is a noble calling. Tyrion laughed. You're too smart to believe that. The Night's Watch is a midden heap for all the misfits of the realm. I've seen you looking at Yoren and his boys. Those are your new brothers, Jon Snow. How do you like them? Sullen peasants, debtors, poachers, rapers, thieves, and bastards, like you all wind up on the wall, watching for Grumpkins and Snarks and all the monsters your wet nurse warned you about. The good part is that there are no Grummins or Snarks, so it's scarcely dangerous work. The bad part is that you freeze your balls off, and since you're not allowed to breed anyway, I don't suppose that matters. Stop it! The boy screamed. He took a step forward, his hands coiling into fists, close to tears. Suddenly, absurdly, Tyrion felt guilty. He took a step forward, intending to give the boy a reassuring pat on the shoulder, or mutter some word of apology. He never saw the wolf, or where or how it had come to him. One moment he was walking towards Snow, and the next he was flat on his back on the hard, rocky ground, the book spilling away from him as he fell, the breath going out of him at the sudden impact, his mouth full of dirt and blood and rotting leaves. As he tried to get back up, his back spasmed painfully. He must have wrenched it on the fall. He ground his teeth in frustration, grabbed a root, and pulled himself back into a sitting position. Help me, he said to the boy, reaching up a hand. Suddenly the wolf was between them. He did not growl. The damn thing never made a sound. It only looked at him with those bright red eyes and showed him his teeth. That was more than enough. Tyrion sagged back to the ground with a grunt. Don't help me then. I'll sit right here until you leave. Jon Snow stroked Ghost's thick white fur, smiling now. Ask me nicely. Tyrion Lannister felt the anger coiling inside him and crushed it out with a will. It was not the first time in his life he had been humiliated, and it would not be the last. Perhaps he even deserved this. I should be grateful for should be very grateful for your kind assistance, Jon, he said mildly. Down, ghost, the boy said. The direwolf sat on his haunches. Those red eyes never left Tyrion. John came around behind him, slid his hands under his arms, and lifted him easily to his feet. Then he picked up the book and handed it back. Why did he attack me? Tyrion asked with a sidelong glance at the direwolf. He wiped blood and dirt from his mouth with the back of his hand. Maybe he thought you were a grumpkin? Tyrion glanced at him sharply. Then he laughed, a raw snort of amusement that came bursting out his nose, entirely without his permission. Oh, gods, he said, choking on his laughter and shaking his head. I suppose I do rather look like a grumpkin. What does he do to Snarks? You don't want to know. John picked up the wineskin and handed it to Tyrion. Tyrion pulled out the stopper and tilted his head and squeezed a long stream into his mouth. The wine was cool, fire, and it trickled down his throat and warmed his belly. He held out the skin to Jon Snow. Want some? The boy took the skin and tried a cautious swallow. It's true, isn't it? He said when he was done. What you said about the Night's Watch? Tyrion nodded. Jon Snow set his mouth in a grim line. If that's what it is, that's what it is. Tyrion grinned at him. That's good, bastard. Most men would rather deny a hard truth than face it. Most men, the boy said. But not you. No, Tyrion admitted. Not me. I seldom even dream of dragons anymore. There are no dragons. He scooped up the fallen bearskin. Come, we'd better return to camp before your uncle calls the banners. The walk was short, but the ground was rough underfoot, and his legs were cramping badly by the time he got back. Jon Snow offered a hand to help him over a thick tangle of roots, but Tyrion shook him off. He would make his own way, as he had all his life. Still, the camp was a welcome sight. The shelters had been thrown up against the tumble-down wall of a long abandoned holdfast. A shield against the wind, the horses had been fed, and fire had been laid. Euron sat on a stone, skinning a squirrel. The savoury smell of stew filled Tyrion's nostrils. He dragged himself over to where his man, Morrick, was tending the stew pot. Wordlessly, Morrick handed him the ladle. Tyrion tasted and handed it back. More pepper, he said. Benjen Stark emerged from the shelter he shared with his nephew. There you are, Jon. Damn it, don't go off like that by yourself. I thought the others had gotten you. It was the Grumpkins, Tyrion told him, laughing. Jon Snow smiled. Stark shot a baffled look at Euron. The old man grunted, shrugged, and went back to his bloody work. The squirrel gave some body to the stew, and they ate it with black bread and hard cheese that night around the fire. Tyrion shared around his wineskin until even Euron grew mellow. One by one, the company drifted off to their shelters and to sleep, all but Jon Snow, who had drawn the night's first watch. Tyrion was the last to retire. As he stepped into his shelter that his men had built for him, he paused and looked back at Jon Snow. The boy stood near the fire, his face hard, still, looking deep into the flames. Tyrion smiled sadly and went to bed. And that's the end of that chapter.